High-stakes trade talks are set to kick off in Washington, but negotiations are poised on the brink of collapse after a week of threats and accusations.
Beijing has responded to looming U.S. tariffs with a warning that it's fully prepared to defend its own interests and will not succumb to any pressure. The Beijing delegation, led by Chinese Premier Liu He, will meet U.S. trade officials for 2 days of discussions aimed at salvaging the situation. But if no agreement is reached, the current trade truce will be over.
The U.S. has already filed paperwork to raise tariffs from 10 to 25% on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods after midnight U.S. time on Friday. China has previously threatened retaliatory measures. But in this trade war, nothing is guaranteed, and this 11th round of talks could face yet another twist at the 11th hour.
Olivia Xiong joins us from Beijing with the latest right now. So, Olivia, China issuing a warning to Washington just before the delegation is set to arrive. Not going to go down too well, is it?
Absolutely. Well, China is saying that it's not only prepared to defend its own interests, but it also has the capacity to do so. In fact, but it is saying that it still hopes that any problems with the U.S. can be resolved through dialogue, although China is rejecting U.S. accusations that it has backtracked on some of its commitments. The Commerce Ministry today said that various commitments have been made for China, but the country is a credible one and it honors its word. And in fact, it is showing goodwill by the fact that, Vice Premier Liu He and the Chinese delegation is still going to Washington for trade talks in spite of this looming tariff hike on Friday. But we have to remember that, some reports are suggesting that China has retreated on various aspects of a draft agreement, including there being some issues with the language that is being used. The U.S. is, of course, asking China to make sweeping structural changes in areas like intellectual property rights and forced technology transfers. And up to today, the Commerce Ministry is saying that, accusations of forced technology transfers are unreasonable and not based on facts. And China is saying that it is prepared to respond to all kinds of possibilities.
升级贸易摩擦不符合两国人民和世界人民的利益。 中方对此深表遗憾。如果美方关税措施付诸实施，中方将不得不采取必要的反制措施。
But while China has said that it will retaliate, we still do not know what these countermeasures exactly are. We do know that in the past, China has levied counter tariffs on U.S. These amount to being worth, on about $110 billion worth of U.S. goods at the moment. But if it's anything to go by, China is portraying this as a new phase in the trade talks. We've seen in some editorials in, for example, the Global Times saying that, both sides seem to be prepared to move from truce talks to one where talks involve fighting and negotiation at the same time.
All right, thanks for that. Olivia Song speaking to us from Beijing.
And for the U.S. side of things, let's cross over to Daniel Rochester live from Washington. Daniel, a volatile week in trade talks and clearly a breakdown in reaching an agreement that satisfies both sides. What continues to be the sticking points?
Well, I think what it comes down to is that the U.S. side believes that the Chinese has watered down the language, particularly on legal enforcement of some of the agreements that they've already reached. So why is that important? Because the U.S. is insisting, as we were saying there, on structural reforms. So that includes things like industrial subsidies to large manufacturers. If the Chinese are telling in negotiations that they are in an ongoing process of reform, as they are, that's fine. But the Americans are saying, look, if you make an agreement and then basically there are off-ramps to that agreement, there are ways in which you can water down the agreement once it's signed, that's why we need very robust legal language. And that's why I think Donald Trump has decided to up the ante. But there are risks for him here too. The retaliation has focused from China on the U.S. agricultural sector, which is a real key base of political support for Donald Trump. So without an agreement, he has trouble ahead. But with an agreement that doesn't seem to be robust, the Democrats have an opportunity to attack him going into the 2020 election.
All right, many thanks for that perspective. Daniel Wright just speaking to us from Washington.